So you've been racing for a little while now at a club level. Maybe you've gone to a few larger events at your local track, but you heard about this big race happening at another track far away, and a bunch of people, including some people from your local track, are going, and you want to go as well. Big races like Masters of Dirt, the Surf City Classic, Roar/F1 Nationals, and some regionals, Psycho Nitro Blast, and a few others fall into this category of big races that you should at least attempt to attend. If not to improve as a driver, then simply to enjoy the experience. Of course, if you're going to go to one of these races, it would be best to come prepared, and that's what I'm going to help you with today. In this video, I'm going to go over some things that you'll need to do to prep for a big RC racing event. Before we begin, however, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and found it helpful. Alright, let's begin. Now this is going to be the number one most important thing to do when it comes to running a big boy event. Getting as much information about the event and how it will run will save you a decent amount of culture shock in the long run. This also feeds into a few things I'm going to mention later on, but let's focus on the broad spectrum here for a bit. One big thing to know about your event is how long it's going to last. 90% of these events these days take place over the course of a very long weekend. So of course your first step would be to schedule some time off work and/or school if need be, and be sure to do so very early. Doesn't really matter how early, just make sure it's early enough to where you're not scrambling to get things done before you leave. There's also the question of what kind of event it's going to be. Make sure you know whether or not there are going to be pit tables provided, or are you going to have to bring your own? Will there be catering, or have to make do with Uber Eats/DoorDash? Will it be an indoor or outdoor event? Just general things like that. Of course, information about the actual event is good to have, but if you know nothing about the place you're going, then you'll be pretty lost when it comes to how to get around. When doing your research, make sure you check to see what hotels are nearby and which ones are actually good. Also, be sure to check to see what restaurants are nearby, as trust me, depending on what kind of event you go to, you're going to have a lot of downtime between sessions. Again, we'll get to that later. It's also important to understand what kind of racing you'll actually be doing and to make sure to prep for it. If you're running a class that requires a spec tire, make sure you have a decent amount of money to actually buy said tires. If they require a motor to be tech inspected, then make sure to get there early before the big wave of people come in. Less time waiting in line, more time actually practicing on the track. Also, if you have the time, be sure to look up some videos of the event you plan to go to if there was one last year or another time, to sort of get an idea of how it actually works and what to expect track-wise. Speaking of which, always be sure to look up a few setups that other people used at previous events in which you're attending. For example, if you're going to the Carpet Nationals at Beachline RC and you're going to be running a B6.4, it may be best to look up a few setups that fit Beachline's surface of black carpet. Also, if you don't have to run a spec tire, then be sure to bring a lot of tires anyway to see what works and what doesn't work for you. Or you could just look at what a lot of the pros are doing and just go from there. Lastly, there's the question of attendance. Knowing how many people are going to be there will give you a good indicator of how long the event will take. Depending on just how far away the event is, the way in which you get there can go one of two ways in the US at least. You can either drive or you can fly. Now, flying of course is the faster option most of the time. A flight from Atlanta, Georgia to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina via Delta takes about 2 hours. By car, the same journey can take about 6 to 7 hours or more depending on traffic. Of course, if you don't mind the drive, there are advantages to driving over flying. For one, driving is considerably less expensive than flying. Let's get into the expenses you have to deal with flying. First, you have the question of the actual ticket itself. Let's look at that flight from Atlanta to Myrtle Beach one more time. A round trip costs at this moment $200 if you book it right now. Another thing to note is the price of checking a bag, which if you're traveling with a full bag of RC stuff is going to be necessary. Again, going back to Delta, checking one bag costs right around $30 for the first bag and $40 for the second if they're both under 50 pounds or 23 kilograms and under the designated size. If you're worried about an RC travel bag being too big, don't be, as the bag that I used that held all of my cars, tools, and tires, including my short course truck, was under the size and weight limit. Granted, I traveled very light, but my point still stands. Anyway, there's also the question of transportation when you actually reach your destination. Again, going back to Masters of Dirt, and by extension, pretty much any event held at Beach RC, The track is pretty close to the Myrtle Beach Airport, as in less than 10 minutes away, along with it being close to pretty much every coastal hotel. However, this is obviously not the case with these tracks all the time. Lots of them, as you already know if you watched my State of RC video, are out in the middle of nowhere. For example, the Peach State Classic. Now, I'm not 100% sure as to whether or not I'm going to attend this event. What I will say, however, is that the event itself is in the middle of nowhere. It'll be taking place in a village called Tiger, Georgia, a village with less than 600 as of the current 2020 census. As for the distance from Tiger to the airport, it's around about an hour and a half to 2 hours away. What this means is that unless you're willing to grab a ride from someone else driving there, you're going to need to rent a car, which depending on how far away you live from the actual track may be counterintuitive. Why go on a 2-hour flight only to drive another 2 hours when you can just drive 3 hours with everything you need in your car, and when you get there you have a means of transportation beyond hitching your ride with someone else. Your method of transportation can depend on a lot of things, from your current financial situation to how many people you're going with. And that leads me to the next section. What you should bring to said event can also vary wildly depending on what kind of event it is. This loops back to the research you did earlier. Let's go back to Masters of Dirt at Beach RC for a sec. This is a 10th scale indoor event with pit tables available for reservation prior to the actual event, along with general reservation for your classes. It's an indoor track with indoor pit tables along with outdoor tables covered by large tents. Now, when I went, I ended up outside because it was quite nice outside and didn't really need an extra table. However, I imagine if the event was really packed to the brim, then perhaps it would be necessary to bring your own table and extension cord. Overall though, bringing what you bring to an average large club race event would suffice for the most part, along with some general extras should you need them, like a soldering iron and wire crimpers should you have some sort of electrical problem, along with the parts and means to build a second car. Now, if you're at a track with a parts store, this may not be entirely necessary, but it's still highly encouraged for you to bring as many spare parts as possible. Even the part that has the smallest chance of breaking, you should bring, just in case. As a lot of times, parts stores don't carry those kinds of parts for the exact reason of why bother, these parts just don't break. Now, if you're going to an outdoor race where there are no pit tables provided, then there is a lot more you or someone in your group is going to have to bring. First would have to be one of those very long extension cords, preferably one with multiple outlets so you can run a couple other things, like example, a lamp. Lots of times races can go on to the night depending on the time of year and just how many races they run. And of course, in order to work on your cars, you'll need to be able to see them. A dedicated pit light or just a good old-fashioned lamp will serve you well in such situations. Another thing to bring would be a canopy tent. Mother Nature is unpredictable. Sometimes it'll be extremely sunny and hot, while other times it'll be rainy. Despite what many might think, these cars aren't waterproof. Getting them wet can end up permanently damaging them by either ruining the electronics or rusting out a lot of the metal components of the car. As a result, having some kind of cover over you, your pit table, and your cars is obviously a good idea. Speaking of which, a folding table along with a folding chair is also something you'll want to bring to a large outdoor event. You can usually find them at hardware stores like Home Depot or Dick's Sporting Goods for decent prices. Also, depending on the weather, you'll want to pack something to make you more comfortable. Be it a portable heater or a really strong fan, either way, you'll be glad you brought one. Trust me. Alright, you've done all the research, you've got all your gear, now it's time to actually participate. How exactly do events like this work? Well, unfortunately this can be a loaded question due to the fact that a lot of events can do things in different ways. However, generally for events above a certain participant count, like say 300 plus, things generally follow at least a similar format. The first few hours or even days are spent in open practice. People are usually still showing up, and for the most part there isn't really a need for controlled practice as there aren't enough people to really warrant it. Also, during this time, if you're running a spec class with controlled motors and tires, this will be your best opportunity to get them inspected by the race officials. The line is usually much shorter, and you have plenty of time afterward to practice. Also, on the question of tires, you want to take this opportunity to acquire your tires and get them approved and glued early on should you need to. Sometimes these tires are handouts that come with the race entry fee, and other times you have to buy them yourself. Other times you'll only be allowed to buy a certain amount of tires for yourself. I remember at Masters of Dirt, you could only buy 5 sets of tires total if you were to run both stock classes, excluding stadium trucks, at least for 2021. Of course, if you're running a class that doesn't require these things, you can pretty much just check in and start testing and tuning. Once people start to funnel in though, the race officials will call for controlled practice and perhaps pre-qualifying. Controlled practice goes something like this. A certain number of people are allowed onto the driver's stand at once, usually about 10 to 20 depending on the size of the track/driver's stand. They will be given a designated amount of time on the track to practice, depending on how long the line is and how many people are in attendance. For Masters of Dirt, it was 5 minutes early on and 4 minutes later on due to the amount of people trying to get some practice in, and at Psycho Nitro Blast it was about 4 minutes initially and 3 minutes later on. For reference, Masters of Dirt had about 350 race entries, while PNB had upwards of 1,000. Once your practice session is done, you then go out to marshal for the next group of drivers. Also, during this time, at some larger events, pre-qualifying will be taking place. Pre-qualifying can vary in form from time to time, but they generally follow this sort of rule. Basically, your best laps are recorded and placed into sort of a ranking system. Which laps are counted can vary depending on which event you go to. Sometimes it'll be your best 3 consecutive laps, other times it'll be your best 3 laps overall. The general idea of this practice is to sort out people in the main qualifying run depending on their skill level. This way, higher level drivers who do this as a day job don't have to deal with lap traffic from less skilled drivers, and conversely, lower skilled drivers don't have to pull over for a faster driver every 5 seconds, ruining their chance to improve their time among those of a similar skill level. Think of it like your ELO in Destiny or MMR in Rocket League. Your performance dictates your score, and you are then matched up with people similar to your score. Once this is done, there will be a driver's meeting where all the rules for that event will be gone over, along with any changes in schedule that may have occurred. Sometimes it's best to record these meetings so you can go over it later if you missed anything. Once everyone has had their practice, everyone has passed tech, or it's just time to actually get on with it, it will be time for qualifying. Qualifying heats will be posted both on paper on a wall or something like that, as well as on LiveRC. If you don't already know, LiveRC is a website you can access online that will allow you to see a multitude of different stats about your driving. Your fastest laps, consistency, placement throughout the run, and just generally which heat you're going to be in. Simply go to events, look up your track, let's go with Beach RC for example, and let's see what a heat I'm in for two-wheel drive short course truck for Masters of Dirt. There we are. Looks like I'll be running two-wheel drive short course truck for heat number 19. So how does qualifying work for these big events? Is there any difference between these and regular races? Not really. Qualifying works the same pretty much universally at these big events, as instead of seeing who can cross the finish line first, you'll be seeing who can put up the most amount of laps in the smallest amount of time. As the saying goes, you're racing the clock, not each other. Depending on the event, there will be a multiple rounds of qualifying, usually 3. As a way to alleviate any bad qualifying runs you may have, sometimes only your best 2 qualifiers will be counted. Other times this may not be the case, so make sure to put your best foot forward. Also, it's important to note that if you're running a spec class or something along those lines, you have to bring your car in for tech inspection before every run to make sure you haven't tinkered with it in between rounds, and to make sure it falls above the weight limit. Anyway, once qualifying is done, it's time for the mains. Depending on how you perform during your qualifiers, you are then placed into your respective main depending on how you qualified, usually in intervals of 10. If you qualified in 5th place overall, congrats, you're in the A main. If you qualified 15th, then you are now in the B main. The mains work like how you'd expect a normal race to play out. Everyone starts on a grid, and you all start at the same time. The person who does the most amount of laps in the least amount of time wins. Don't be too discouraged if you end up in a lower main though, as in some events, they have a system called bumping. Bumping basically works like this. Say if you're in the C main and placed in the top 2, you move up to the next main, which would be B main. Theoretically, you could keep bumping up to higher mains all the way up to the A main if you're good or lucky enough to do so. This is what happened to me in Masters of Dirt with my short course truck. Because I won the B main, I was able to bump up into the A main, where I placed 7th overall. Once the mains are over, that's it. The race program is over. Everyone collects their trophies, pictures are taken, and people start heading home. These are some general pieces of advice I can give to you regarding my own personal experience with large events that I haven't gone over already. First, there's the question of food. Eating healthy is, as we all know, paramount to keeping your mind sharp and staying alert. So when I say making sure to eat good, quality food if possible, and not skipping meals is really important. I truly mean it. Trying to survive off of junk food will lead you to feeling slow and not even close to 100%. So when I'm talking healthy food, I'm talking your fruits, your veggies, quality, protein, grains, and generally other foods to keep you healthy and alert. Along with this comes the need to stay hydrated. Bringing a giant cooler full of ice and water bottles and other drinks like apple or orange juice will do you and everyone around you many favors. Or conversely, you could show up with one of those big gallon jugs full of water to keep you hydrated throughout the day. Another thing to do is to make sure you get as much sleep as reasonably possible. Now, I say reasonably because a lot of times these races will go on into the wee hours of the morning and start about pretty much when the sun rises. So if you happen to have an unfortunate fate of having your heat towards the end of the program that day, I'm sorry to say you're kind of screwed here. What I will say is, if you have the capability to do so, getting sufficient sleep will seriously up your driving skill. Seriously, racing when you're tired isn't going to yield good results, so maximizing the time you have to get enough sleep so you're not completely dead by the time your heat is up will do you wonders on the track. In the case of actually driving, a good way to get an idea of what to expect on the track is just simply walk around on it. Sometimes, say during or directly before a driver's meeting, you'll be given an opportunity to walk the track. This may seem kind of weird, but trust me, this is something you'll want to do, especially on bigger 8-scale tracks. During these walks, be sure to take into account as many track features as you possibly can, be it potholes or which part of a jump gives you the most or least amount of airtime. Avoiding these features can give you an edge over other drivers who didn't walk the track and are now wondering why their buggy just threw a hissy fit and is now doing currently a front flip. Of course, this doesn't really apply to carpet tracks as much, but it can still help sometimes. Continue this theme of knowing the track. Be sure to take into account as many track changes as you can and study what different changes like moisture, temperature, and general use does to a track. Lots of times, track officials will water the track to keep the traction consistent. Other times they won't. Being able to predict how the track is going to be when your turn is up and being able to tune your car around that will put you leaps and bounds ahead of your competition. There's also the question of your tire game, which as we all know, is about 80% of your setup these days. Looking at what tires pros use a lot of the time can help you make a decision on which ones to go out on and which ones to avoid as well. If you see even a pro-level driver struggling to keep traction on a certain set of tires, maybe you shouldn't use them either. Speaking of which, don't be afraid to talk to as many people as possible to get as much information as possible. And I'm not just talking about the top level drivers either. Sometimes just having a second set of eyes on your car can really put things into perspective as to why it's acting a certain way. Having a high level driver look at your car can also help a lot as they can spot things many people can't. Also, having someone watch your races or practice sessions can also help a lot. I got a lot of help from a few drivers while I was at Masters of Dirt from people like Chris Folke, help lending me parts to keep me in the race, and Chris Van Air, Ryan Goyette, and Justin Whitaker for pretty much coaching me to go faster, along with general setup tips. Last tip I can personally give you is to simply enjoy yourself, to have fun. These events are sometimes more than just race events. They're for people like you and me, who love to race toy cars, to gather and enjoy our hobby, to improve ourselves as drivers, and just to enjoy ourselves with friends and family. Getting worked up over your placement and dumb things that happen on the track can ruin the whole point of even going to an event like this. RC is a fun hobby, and it's up to us as hobbyists to allow it to be fun. Alright, that was a bit of a long one, so if you stayed until this point, I really can't thank you enough. This video is in preparation for a couple big RC races coming up towards the end of the year, so if you're planning to attend any of these races, be sure to let me know in the comments which ones you're going to. Also, if I missed any tips that you may want to share as well, go ahead and do so in the comment section as well. I pretty much read all of them. Lastly, if you want to support my channel more directly, you can check out my Patreon, where I post updates about my latest videos, and to those of you who are in the A main or higher tiers, you'll be getting a Roach RC sticker in this design in the mail. Just keep in mind if you live outside the US and Canada, it may take a while to reach you. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Ryan Lamb, Joe Jenkins, Juliet Lovelace, The Mailman 110, Brian Lofton, and Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.